So, I'm not going to be talking about Go. I'm going to be talking about communication. That's right, talking and stuff. And let me just say, you hate me. Don't say and stuff. This is from The Nice Guys. This is, I don't know. I wrote and stuff and then immediately thought about this movie because I saw it. Funny line, funny movie. Had a couple of flaws in it, but that's okay. Why are we going to be talking about communication today? Because, well, it makes life more enjoyable, and it can reduce anxiety and stress and lead to generally life of more peace. It allows for like a deeper connections, more meaningful connections with others. And then just from an efficacy standpoint, makes groups of people more effective at accomplishing shared goals when we can communicate in the same language tune. So one thing I want to start with is I want to volunteer. I'm going to grab one from this room since people here. Okay, Keith. So let's say that we're pairing together. So this is something that obviously involves a lot of communication. So we're working on a project together, and I'm with you, and I'm kind of not super focused on this day. And you can tell that I'm like in and out of focus. I'm like checking my phone periodically, pulling the phone out, not like really there. So like, how might you? I'm putting you on the spot, but like, how might you approach this situation? I'm doing something that's like you probably don't like, or well, how do you?
Probably just ask people what's going on. See if there's like what's going on in your life. What's up? Just like maybe you're checking the phone or something, bad news or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like
a little bit of probing just to kind of see what's going on.
Yeah. It's like good morning.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, what's up? What's going on with you? Oh, you can sleep very well. We'll all try it tomorrow.
Yeah. So I think that's like a way, really, like there's a lot of positives in that. It approaches this situation in a way that's not like real confrontational. It's pulling it out. But there are certain ways that like that could be ineffective, where I could respond to you and I could be like, well, I don't know, not much, and then I could keep on doing it. Or I could give you some kind of dissatisfactory answer. Maybe I don't want to open up to what the question is. But I think that's a really good start. So the point of this exercise was obviously not to pick on Keith or anybody, but just to lay out that this is a difficult situation, and this is something that we in this office deal with a lot. Like we're working with each other a lot. We're working with people, our clients, a lot, and situations will come up that we are, for lack of better words, just don't like. They just don't agree with us so much internally, and it's causing us to be less happy, and causing our work to suffer for that. So, communication. What I'm specifically talking about today is this process called nonviolent communication. And so, I feel like this is a gift that we have used before in the Tiny Talk. Yeah. What is nonviolent communication? So essentially, it's a methodology or set of tools for communicating between individuals that facilitates honesty, deepening of relationships, and addressing both parties' fundamental needs. So it's both a type of thinking and a use of language. So it was created by this handsome devil here, Marshall Rosenberg, which is, it's a really high photo. And popularized with the publication of this book that he wrote, Nonviolent Communication. My particular story, how I came to it, like I was at this sort of retreat type thing one time in my life several years ago, and we were in kind of like a circle, and we were sharing some experience, and I said something. I said like, I should yada 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 or something like that, and one of the facilitators of this group like kind of stopped me in that point and like asked me if I'd ever heard of this nonviolent communication or heard that book, and told me that I might benefit from giving it a read and trying on some of its tactics. She picked that up just from that little phrase that like I should, that there was actually a lot of self-judgment in the way I expressed that. And so from that point, I started exploring it, found the ideas to be very powerful, and I think super relatable to many, many, many different areas in life. Another thing I'll point out, it's Dustin Moskovitz recommended. Dustin Moskovitz, one of the co-founders of Facebook and founders of Asana. I've got a link there to the startup class that Sam Altman produced a couple years back. It's a really great lecture series about startups and things. So Moskovitz is, I think, on the first lecture. At the end of it, he gives like some recommended readings, and one of those was this book, Communication. So that stuck out for me, obviously, when I saw it. But why non-violence and like violence? So what's wrong with violence? So a Webster definition of violence is the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. That's one of them. Another definition is injury by or as if by distortion, infringement, or profanation. So that's like very strong language. And it might seem a little bit like extreme to be describing like the way we talk to each other in those terms. So like question that I think is pretty obvious is like, can speech really be violent? Like, can we really put those things together? And more pressing, like, can speech when I'm pairing with Keith be violent? Or can Keith's speech to me be violent? Violence is such a loaded word. But I think we can boil it down to like basically this tenet that like violence basically is the equivalent to bringing another harm. And if we start to consider how easy it is for someone's speech for somebody to say something or for you to say something to somebody else and it to cause them some kind of discomfort, then the definition of it becomes much broader and much more applicable to most things that we say, or like most things that we do. So the idea of like nonviolent communication is communication that kind of goes around that is very conscious of that much of the speech we use it can be hurtful rather than consciously trying to be loving. So it's really like a practice of bringing your emotional, mental, physical faculties all together with the goal of contributing to the well-being of yourself and others. So that's a very long sales pitch of like what it is. So the two questions that kind of drive nonviolent communication is, the first one is, what is alive in us? So what is really happening? What are we currently experiencing? And how do we then express that? And the second question is then, what can we do to make life more wonderful? So it's really basic. What is going on, and how can we improve it, essentially? And that's done with the process in 4 simple but very, very difficult, actually, steps. And the first one is observation, feelings, needs, and finally request. So that's it. It's the process in 4 steps. Simple. And that's it. Again. I'm kidding. So yeah, no, it is a very simple process, but as I said, like, it's really, really hard, and I've learned it, and I've tried to practice it, and I still suck at it because it's just really hard. We're not conditioned to use language the way that, well, this process kind of prescribes. So the first piece of the process is observation. So what we mean by that is observation and not evaluation. Observation, meaning clearly observe what we are seeing, hearing, or touching, like what is it that we are experiencing, and no more, not evaluation. Rather than evaluation, which can be forming an opinion or making some kind of judgment or evaluation about such thing or event or person. Like we, it's a generalization, but like we tend to evaluate at the same moment that we're making an observation. So I am on my phone, I'm pairing with Keith, and Keith looks at me on my phone, and there's an observation that Josh is on his phone in this moment. What we tend to do is jump straight to the evaluation. At least I know this from my own experiences. What I tend to do, and I think I've seen this with most other people, that we jump to evaluation. We say, okay, not that Josh is on his phone, but that it is wrong that Josh is on his phone. And so we evaluate. We say that things are either right or wrong. We put labels on them. We try to put some kind of definition as to what things are. And that sort of makes it easier for us to understand what's going on. But that can be very limiting to our abilities to communicate with each other when we start to put labels on things so quickly like that. This process of evaluating instantly along with observation is really rooted in a sense of wrongness of others. Josh is on his phone, so that is wrong. That's what's going on. Like he's doing something bad. And this picture right here, I think really does encapsulate that feeling that we get when somebody does come to us with something they don't like so often. It does feel like scolding, like your parents are scolding you. And that sucks. Like that's a really uncomfortable, really crappy feeling. And like what that generally does is it provokes defensiveness. I really enjoyed Mirzia's talk on giving feedback the other day, and I really connected to some of the points she made. And I think it's important to kind of get a sense of like where defensiveness comes from. That like if you're the child here and you're getting scolded by your parent is like maybe the most important person in your life, and they're telling you that you've done something wrong, which essentially means not good, and that there is some dividing line between good and bad, and that you were on the bad side of it, and that is alienating. That is essentially saying that like you were not good, and then it's very quickly to jump to some idea that I don't belong. Maybe like I am not good, I don't belong. And it's that type of fear of maybe I don't belong, maybe I don't belong in this pair, maybe I don't belong at this company, like if my code is not good enough to allow me to belong here. It provokes a very natural reaction of defensiveness, which, like when we say defensive, it's really like us going on the offensive to prove that the other person is wrong in their statements of their feedback or whatever, because we get insecure that, like, okay, maybe I don't belong. So understanding defensiveness, I think, is a really important aspect of how we communicate, understanding that, like, it's rooted in the sense of need to belong. And so we kind of, it's rooted in this sense, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but it's rooted in the sense of wrongness of others and an inability to express oneself in terms of vulnerability. And there's a quote here: vulnerability is not winning or losing, it's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. And that's by Brene Brown, who she has a very, very popular TED Talk on vulnerability. She's written a couple of books about vulnerability and shame. She's sort of like a thought leader on that subject, and she's written some very powerful things. Like Keith is asking me, like, what's going on with me being on my phone? And there isn't a sense of, well, like, Josh, like, that makes me upset that you're being on your phone. We tend to not express ourselves, so, like, what's really going on inside of us. For many reasons, but I think, like, generally in our culture, we live in this very, like, patriarchal, like, stoic culture, that, like, expression of feelings is a really scary thing. And it takes, for lack of a better word right now, it takes a lot of vulnerability to do that. So wrapping up observation, I've spent a lot of time on this observation over evaluation point, because I think it's maybe the toughest, and I think it's where we tend to get, like, off track in this process, like right from the get-go. So again, it's clearly observing what we are seeing, hearing, and touching, nothing more. Being very specific to context, to time and place. Not, Josh, you're on your phone all the time. Now that's some sort of evaluation, but, like, Josh, pulled out your phone twice in the last half an hour. That makes it specific to context and time. And you're separating the actions one takes from, like, a evaluation of their character. Okay. That just brings us to our second point, which is our feelings. So we talked a little bit about feelings and vulnerability. So feelings. This is, like, another part of answering that question of what is alive inside of us. So we kind of get a sense of what are the things that are happening through observation, and then we tap into what is going on inside of us. And this is really important because an expression of feelings allows your other party that you're communicating with to connect with you on a very human level. They can understand then, like, what is it that you are actually experiencing, and then that allows you, when you get to the end of this, to actually, like, make a request of them to empathize with you far more easier. So one like trap that we kind of fall into many times over when we're dealing with identifying our feelings is we commonly use feelings to denote some type of analysis. Like, I feel that we should, like, I feel that, like, we should maybe add a test here. I'm feeling like we don't need to do that. I'm feeling like this test is not necessary. That's actually not a feeling at all. That's really a thought. It's a piece of analysis. You could easily replace feeling in that sentence with, I think that we should not put a test here, or I think we do not need to have a test here. which is much more accurate to what is really being communicated at the point. And it's good to be aware of this because we tend to overuse feeling in this way. And then when we actually want to express real feelings, it becomes more difficult because the word feel loses its power, loses its definition. So good thing is to try to be aware of that. And when we are using feelings, like we want to be like speak to the sensations, the emotions. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling a little bit fearful. Speak to the actual emotions, what is actually alive in us, and it's good to try to use specific over general language, generic language. So instead of I'm feeling good about that, you could say I feel ecstatic or excited or whimsical, and that tells the other person far much more about what is actually going on inside. Again, and this is just so that you can become more relatable to them. You can make a more real connection with them, more deeper, more honest connection. So that leads us to our needs. So needs, yeah, we all have them, but we often don't really admit to it. We don't really communicate from that point of view. And part of this nonviolent communication process is the tenet, or one of the most important tenets of it, is that is that our feelings are rooted in our needs. So in order to really communicate about our needs, it's very vital that we take responsibility for our feelings. Sorry, I'm getting lost in my notes. Don't remember what I have here. So, what do we mean by taking responsibility for our feelings? I'll back up here. Like, how many times have you guys heard like somebody communicating something to you, or you've heard this when other people are communicating to each other, where they say like, when you do such and such, it makes me feel such and such, right? Like that's a very common way of communication, and we've sort of been conditioned that that's the way that we communicate. That like something happens and it makes me feel a certain way. That our feelings are based on sort of outside events that happen to us. Somebody does something, it makes us feel a certain way. What this NVC, what nonviolent communication sort of proposes, is that all of our emotions are rooted in some kind of underlying need. And generally, we're not really tapped into what that need is. So we tend to project our emotions onto somebody else or onto some other outside event. And this idea of tapping into our needs is very, very difficult in a big way, because like it's sort of taboo in our culture to express our needs, when it's a very, very human thing, but it is sort of taboo. Like this concept of like don't be so needy, I think, is something that like we have all felt, and it's something that's gone through our heads so often, or like quite often. And has caused us to not communicate something when we might like need something from a partner or a coworker or a loved one, but where we become shy about communicating it. There's a fear of being ostracized for being too so this needs to express our needs. This can be like to express like what we are feeling through our needs and taking responsibility for our feelings can be approached quite simply through this like practice of I feel yada 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 because I yada yada yada. So like here's like a denial of responsibility. Like you never make it home for dinner. Um, Versus I am sad that you won't be coming home for dinner because I was hoping we could spend the evening together. So in the first one, the person who's communicating is putting the blame on somebody else. And it's a very big generalization. It's an evaluation there. It's like you're never making it home for dinner. There's judgment in that of that person's character there. In the second one, we're saying very specifically, I'm sad in this moment that you won't be coming home for dinner because I have a need to spend time together. I was hoping we could spend time together. So it's a very powerful practice of expressing a feeling and then taking responsibility for it based on some kind of need. I feel that because I. So like here's another one. I feel scared when you raise your voice. Like that seems like a very rational thing to say, very reasonable thing to say. Uh, but again, this is actually denying responsibility for this feeling that you are having. Now, if somebody raising their voice, it can totally be uncomfortable, and maybe they're not doing a very kind thing by raising their voice, but communicating that they are wrong for doing so, essentially, or that like doing this does not help the situation. Um, So like another way to communicate that is like when you raise your voice, now I feel scared because I'm telling myself something might get hurt here, and I need to know that we're all safe. So you raising your voice makes me feel scared because I need to know that we're going to be safe. So instantly with that statement, somebody can connect with, okay, this is what's happening, this is what you are feeling, and this is what you need. Okay, I get it. Get like where you're at right now. So these are examples from the Nonviolent Communication book, by the way. So finally, that gets us all to the request. So those first 3 points of the process, observation, feelings, and needs, all answer that first question of what is alive inside of us. The request fulfills the second question of what can we do to make life more wonderful. So that is basically like a simple and direct request to the other party. And it's very important that we try to use positive language over negative language. So that may seem obvious, but it's actually very difficult to do. Like, I am like, if we go back to like when you raise your voice, I feel scared because I'm telling myself someone might get hurt here, and I need to know that we're all safe. Uh, like, could you not raise your voice? Is negative language. Um, so like, please do not shout in this room versus like, please talk in a lower voice. So you're providing a request for them to take a positive action, and this is an important little difference. Rather than trying to shut down some kind of thing that the other person is doing, you are making a request that they can fulfill your needs in a positive way. And when a request is made, it is very, very important that it's made in a way that truly allows for choice. It's very easy to make a request that, if denied, is laden with a ton of guilt. Uh, so, like, let's look at the same example again, like that we saw before. You're saying, I'm sad that you won't be coming home for dinner because I was hoping we could spend the evening together. Uh, like, I could make a request saying, can you make an exception and come home tonight? Uh, but there's actually a lot of negativity in that because that's forcing that person to say no to what they are currently doing. Uh, so we could say, like, can you make time tomorrow evening for us to have dinner together? Uh, if I were to say, like, I was hoping that you could make an exception and come home tonight, then it also doesn't really allow for true choice, because if the person says no, then there's a lot of guilt that is associated with that. So they're like very fine points, but taken all together, they can be very, very powerful, but they're very, very hard. And that's it. That's the end, really.